Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Negotiation Podcast. I'm your host, Todd Embley, and today I am excited to welcome Shai Oster. Shai is a Pulitzer-winning journalist who has most recently served as the Asia Bureau Chief for The Information. He previously worked at the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, with postings spanning China, Europe, and the U.S. He's now working as an independent consultant. Shai, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Todd. It's a pleasure.
All right, as we usually do, where in the world are you, where we are recording you from today?
So I am in the lush suburbs of northern Bangkok, where it's always steamy and hot. And right now we're in the rainy season. Um, and, living the dream, paying a fraction of the rent I used to pay in Hong Kong for multiples of square footage and a pool and, doing all right.
Yeah, yes, exactly. No, that sounds amazing, and good on you for being able to get over into a place like that. I'm sure it's amazing. Let's start with your background. Tell us about what got you interested in reporting on China and Asia originally. Usually it's a I fell over backwards into Asia type of story. And then tell us about, your career up to this point.
Sure, sure. Fell over backwards is about right. I'm Israeli American, and but basically grew up in Long Island in a nice sheltered existence in the suburbs. Had my first reporting job covering crime in a small New England town, which you would think is bucolic and sweet, but was a murderous, uh, violent little. It's a neighborhood about 20 minutes north of Amherst and UMass, but man, so I had more culture shock there than you could ever believe. Um, and after a couple of years of covering crime and um, violence and mayhem, stumbled across our gardening columnist who had been a foreign expert in China. Now, foreign experts of the Chinese government, going back to the 50s, has a ministry of foreign experts. At the beginning, it was to bring in Russians who helped build hydropower dams, power plants, whatnot. And it had evolved into, still exists now, a broader range of foreign experts brought in to assist. And one of the big things they do is they bring in foreigners to copy edit all their propaganda. China Daily, for example, which is where I ended up. And so kind of randomly, I gave this person my resume, and she's like, "Oh, I'll send it in," because I was like, "I got to get the heck out of Greenfield before I get my head chopped off." And by the way, it's a beautiful place, and just my perspective was spending all the time with the cops and the crooks and the lawyers.
Yeah.
Oh, sometimes that description fitting one person at the same time. But and just as I was preparing to go to grad school, I got a call from China Daily asking if I'd go, and I said, "Look, I'll talk to you in a year." And as after a year at a journalism school, I decided that I do want to be a foreign correspondent. And what the hey, roll a dice. Let's try China because I have zero background in it. What could go wrong? I don't speak Chinese. I know nothing about the country. I have zero background in this. It'll be fine. And this was in 1998, and I got off the plane at the old Beijing airport, which was, felt really developing world. Was met by the foreign minister, the Wai Shiban, the person in charge of handling the foreigners from China Daily, and was just like, wow, this place is crazy, and I just loved it. I had a blast. China Daily was my job was copy editing, and China Daily is a state-owned newspaper. As opposed to, say, the People's Daily, which is a party-owned newspaper. So there's a bit of a difference. But still, it's, and it was just a fascinating introduction into China. I love the people I worked with, the Chinese who were at China Daily. These are the best and the brightest who had developed the English skills at a high level, and they were ambitious journalists. And this was a time of it's just a different world than it is now. But so people would try to push the boundaries and be, do good stories and do good reporting. And for me, it was just an amazing entree into the whole world. Like working in a Chinese Danwei work unit was fascinating, from the simple stuff like, Chinese people don't use chopsticks when they eat lunch at the work unit. They use a spoon and they just shovel it
Or a
in.
spork.
Right, because it's fast. But they didn't have sporks. This was like in 98, right? This was pre-Starbucks. So, and you learned
Pre-spork.
oh, right, no one had their own passport. The passports were all given through the
Yeah.
work unit, right? And then people, in order to going abroad was still an amazing, a rare thing. I was also there when housing reform began, which was this one of the least understood phenomenon in China. But basically, Premier Zhu Rongji, who I think has done more to, I think Deng Xiaoping and Zhu Rongji kind of stand as like the builders of modern China. Zhu Rongji is the guy who did WTO session, which everyone knows how that transformed, for better or worse, global manufacturing. But also what he did for China was the housing reformer. Effectively, he took the state-owned housing stock, because everybody in the city worked at a work unit, and the work unit owned the apartment. And what they did was, at discount prices, fire sale prices, they effectively transferred this massive stock of state wealth to individuals, and that sparked the housing boom. That moment created enormous middle class wealth. And like, I remember everybody was like Zhuangxiu, everybody was renovating, just this whole trickle down effect. Anyway, so it was a fascinating time. And so after I'd done a 1-year contract with China Daily, and then was lucky enough to stumble into a credentialed reporting gig for something called Bureau of National Affairs, which is a publisher of sort of specialist newsletters on like taxation issues. What else? Sort of very policy oriented stuff that's, for example, that lawyers would read. And that was great. So I was writing for them, as well as freelancing for others such as Christian Science Monitor and the Wall Street Journal. And eventually I ended up in a magazine, and I just loved it. I was learning Chinese. This was a time of like rapid growth, optimism, just a good time. Just like really
Great time.
Yeah. Everybody was like, this is the era of Jiang Zemin, and the ascension to WTO. It was just a great time to be in China, and there's so much energy. Um, and I love that the Chinese have this. I think they still do, but they just had this like, we'll try anything attitude. Like, hey, American football, sure, that looks amazing. Let's learn how to do that, right? Pole dancing, that seems like a fascinating exercise. Let's do pole dancing. Yoga, oh, I love it. Like, there was just this incredible openness, and it was just a good time. So after a couple of years, I ended up in the
It all came out. My nostalgia is inspiring me to jump in.
Yes,
I got there in 2007, so a little bit later, and it was amazing for different reasons. Yeah, I mean, the iPhone comes out, the smartphone's there, 1 billion people are getting on the internet. It was just amazing. But China itself, China was a different beast back then, certainly to what it was when I left in 2016. And certainly different than what it is today for various reasons, COVID and other. But, back then it was, I don't know, there was no anxiety. There was no, everybody was having fun together. You were just a part of it, and they were excited to have you and talk to you and learn from you, and vice versa. And there was no threat or any reason to be worried. Everything was open. They had all watched the DVDs of Friends, and they had seen how the other half lives, and they were excited to try all the things like you just said. And I don't know, there was just such a, I don't know, almost like an innocent air of just positivity and optimism and try anything and being risk averse. And yeah, I mean, I think the young people just felt like things were changing, and they weren't always going to be, how their grandparents and parents and had all lived and grown up, and things were going to change, and it was a much more open, and they could start to make more choices for themselves. And yeah, it was just wonderful.
I'll give you an example. 2008, the Olympics, I was at a massive party hosted by Soho China. You remember the big Chinese real estate. And at the time, Jiang Xin, who was the co-founder with her husband, Pan Shi, she's almost like a friend, right? Because she was like down with the Western journalists. So this massive party at their villa complex, coming by the wall, that sort of hotel villas along the Great Wall. And it was every foreign correspondent, like all of us, maybe a couple of English teachers. Jared Leto was there. Quincy Jones was there. I have a photo of my wife with Quincy Jones because they look a little similar. And in fact, she's from the same part of the States as he is. So he was asking, "Are you one of mine?" And it was just like, none of that's possible now, right? That kind of a party. And I know part of it is the nostalgia for who we were back then. Let's not,
Yep.
um, but it is, you're right. And also it's like that was an era of the economics bear out as well, right? That was an era of like you could double your income. Chinese could double their income year to year, right? They
Yeah.
were, if you look at people's resumes from that era, it was like jump and jump and jump and jump and jump. And the fact is that now you have 20% stubbornly stuck at 20% youth unemployment, 1 out of 5. That's crazy in the world's second biggest economy. You have stagnating incomes. You have the most worrying part is that housing, which is where everybody's wealth is
Hmm.
locked up, ain't doing so hot. So yeah, that malaise, and then I'm reflecting what my Chinese sources are telling me, that like this is even like the winners of the China tech boom are still kind of like,
Hmm.
it's just not the same time. But yeah, so just quickly, so after I Asia Week, then I did a couple years in London covering OPEC for Dow Jones, then Wall Street Journal in 2010 in Beijing. That's when I was with this amazing group of journalists read by Rebecca Blumenstein, who's now at ABC or NBC. My gosh, I can't keep track of how her career is just zooming up. And we got a Pulitzer writing about the social and environmental consequences of China's boom. This was around the time of the Songhua River, the was it pollution of the northern rivers, and sorts of that's the beginning of the awareness of like the environmental degradation. And
Hmm.
did that for a couple of years. Moved down to Hong Kong with Bloomberg. Did some stories that kicked up a couple of hornets' nests. You can Google my name if you want more on that. And then in 2000 and something, launched the Information's Asia Bureau, built it up to a team of 4. And that was a lot of fun. But again, like the arc, right? Like when I joined, there was a VC boom, right? Valuations were soaring.
Hmm.
The amount of money pouring in from the US was crazy. And now, I mean, I timed it, I guess, pretty well. It's just that whole thing has collapsed. Now, I've always argued that it was kind of fundamentally weird that China tech was reliant on Western money, and the whole idea that like all the biggest Chinese companies have to list in the US. Yeah, I get that it's like massive liquidity, but think about it this way. What if Google could only list in Russia and you couldn't buy or you couldn't trade in rubles?
Yeah.
That's effectively the way the Chinese system works
Yeah.
right now, is that all of its most important and powerful tech companies, all companies, frankly, even the banks, are listed overseas, which means that most Chinese people, don't have access to trading them. And that the people who are judging the value of your companies don't use your stuff, right? The Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, which I talk about them, I use them as a proxy for just because I
Mm-hmm.
like the name. But like they're not using Taobao to buy stuff, right? They're not
Hmm.
using Meituan to pick a restaurant, and yet they're the ones who are picking and choosing the winners based on like an Excel spreadsheet and like the investor relations guy, but not based on like I'm in the country, I'm using the app, I see around me, right? They have to like fly in, which remember 3 years they couldn't fly in. They have to
Yeah.
fly in and like, oh, my friends are using it, right? Like it's just a whole, the Chinese say a dun, right? And like in the Chinese framework of the Marxist dialectic, all contradictions must be resolved. And I think in some sense what we're seeing now is the resolution of that conflict, of that contradiction,
Hmm.
right? It just
Yes.
didn't fundamentally make sense for the world's second biggest economy to be reliant on a bunch of college endowments to pick its tech winners, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
worked. It was great. Good for the endowments. They made a bunch of money. Good for the Chinese entrepreneurs who like got that money. But if you think about it, it's just kind of weird.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me get
Yeah.
off
I
my
know.
soapbox.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just there was a lot of things like even just how VC formed and the legalities around it, and some of those initial shareholder agreements and how they all kind of stuff they were all kind of borrowed and brought over from that. Just want to say thank you to the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund that obviously have been listening to this podcast to get some of those decision making tools that they need. Appreciate that, big listeners, I'm sure. So you got us caught up to the information. Tell us about what you're up to now.
So I'm now doing my own thing as an independent strategic communications consultant and a bit of business development consulting as well. And my clients are primarily outbound Chinese,
Mm.
or Chinese VC and some of the biggest Chinese founded startups, and helping them. And it's interesting because there still is the money coming in from the West, and so there's still a narrative to be crafted. And there's also Chinese companies that are now outbound, and they're trying to navigate how to not only communicate to the world, but it's not just what you say, but what you. It's not just about spin, but it's about what you do. Right? If you're doing terrible things, no amount of spin is going to help it. So I'm also helping them figure out what they need to improve in terms of particularly ESG stuff. And it's been fascinating because some of the companies would have been slam dunks 5 years ago. Just, you know,
Yeah.
consumer facing, just would have been no problem at all. But now in this environment, it's bonkers. And the problem is that because of these companies still have these Western investors, they still need to go to the US markets. And it's very tricky. Um, Not only because the global markets right now are unpredictable and right. There's it's kind of the IPO windows opening a bit in the US, but it's been not
Mm-hmm.
fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the problem is that Hong Kong is dismal. So even if you're a Chinese company and you had the choice, it's easier to list in Hong Kong, right? Uh, because of regulations. Um,
Benchmarks and yeah, yeah.
yeah, but there's no liquidity, and like trading volume is just zilch. I mean, a lot of the senior bankers that I know have left Hong Kong because there's just no business. IPO bankers got nothing to do. So if you're a Chinese company looking to do an IPO outside of China, uh, which is still the preferred option for a number of reasons, you got to go to the U.S. because that's where, even in this downish market, that's where the liquidity is. That's where the big money is. And so it's been fun, kind of like fun. I use that very loosely. Fascinating, trying to help them with their messaging and with the actual behavior and the things they do, and dealing with sort of the high level C-suite. And it's just challenging times, but it's just really fascinating. And I think there's so much. Uh, I think prejudice. Yes, have there been bad actions? Yes. Is there some cause to be concerned? Yes. Um, but so much of what the Chinese companies are doing is exactly the same that Western companies are doing, particularly when it comes to like ESG stuff. Um, because let's say, for example, in manufacturing, is Apple, like, everybody's making their stuff in China. Everybody. Amazon, I would almost jokingly say Amazon's a Chinese company just that happens to have headquarters in Seattle, right? Like, without China, what is Amazon, right? Like, they would
Mm-hmm.
disappear, right?
Yep. Yeah.
But because they're a marketplace, they're not responsible for what's happening on their platform.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
but anyway,
Convenient.
and because they're American, they don't face the same level of scrutiny and suspicion. Now, yes, is there like cause? As I said, like I'm not naive. I mean, I trust me. I've been in the back seat of a Chinese police car. Not and have had to sign confess. You know what I mean? I know the system. I know what it is, and I understand that,
Mm-hmm.
like, the concerns. Like, for example, TikTok. Yes, I see where the concerns are, but also Facebook ain't exactly benign all the time, as we saw.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it's interesting to try to figure out. Um, working with these companies has been fascinating, and I still also but there is still, even with the Chinese economy being as weak as it is, it's still a billion plus people. There's still a middle class. There's still room for the right American company to go in there, or a Western company, not necessarily just American.
Excellent. Yes, and that's a lot of what we want to hear and kind of what we promote on here as well is that it if you look at the surface, of foreign direct investment, or even just the population of expats or what have you, you might not think things are great. That's your opportunity. That is your opportunity right there. While everybody else is waiting for somebody else to make the first move, go ahead and make the first move. I think now is a great time to go and get in, and I think they'll be more welcoming potentially than they have been in the past. So now you have been monitoring China's tech scene closely for a while. We talked a little bit about it. That's a little bit about my background, so there's some crossover there. I want you to pick a technology or something that's exciting in the technology realm that's a really cool story right now, but then maybe I'm going to put some handcuffs on you in a little bit and maybe say, let's take EV and AI off the table as choices for you.
That's not fair, dude. That's like chop the right hand off, chop the left hand off. Can you write now? Sorry, that's going to get me. Maybe we delete that part. But yeah.
But
okay.
You know what I mean, and that's fair.
After...
And that's fair. Yeah, well, that's fine, and you can speak to that too.
Biotech. No, biotech. We can say. I mean, biotech for sure. And there still is IoT stuff is still happening. So biotech is hard because you really, those are, you need expertise.
It might get a bad rap too.
Well, no. I mean, they're actually doing okay. Yes, there's yet another crackdown on a sector. So all the the pharma companies are getting hammered now because this is every time you think you found a safe space in China, somebody comes in and cuts your legs off. But within the startup space, there's a lot of really bright, smart Chinese PhDs, and a lot of them were trained in the US, of course, or Canada, actually. By the way, Canada's a huge hub for AI.
And pilots.
So there's a lot of companies that are sort of cross-border, like there's Crystal Pi, which is Boston, and is it Shenzhen or Shanghai? I forget. And what they're doing is they're applying AI to protein formation, and I think that, and then what you do is, so you use AI and machine learning to come up with molecules and begin the early testing, and then you combine that with massive scale robotics to actually do the pipettes. And so they're really unleashing very powerful drug discovery models. There's also a lot of sort of early trial and other sort of outsourcing work that's being done in China still. And I think that's an area where there's definitely still opportunity for growth, and it doesn't seem to have been subject to political headwinds either in the U.S. or China. These companies, drug discovery, drug development, seem to be okay, and venture capitalists like Chi Ming are still doing all right. And what's interesting is, like, people are now thinking that the exit doesn't necessarily have to be offshore. It might be a domestic IPO because, I don't know if you're aware, but now the Chinese stock markets, I believe in liquidity, it's the second to the US. It's massive. It's done really well. And so it's complicated to get your money out, but you can. You have to pay, all sorts of fees, and there's lockup periods, and it's not easy, but you can do it. And so, and I think biotech is kind of being greenlit by both sides, and clean tech. It's another area where the regulatory headwinds on both sides are in your favor. Sorry, regulatory tailwinds. Both the U.S. and China. This is one of the few places where we're still sort of talking positively to each other. China Solar, for example. I mean, yes, it was an ugly story that involved a lot of U.S. bankruptcies and dumping, and and government subsidies and whatnot. But now I believe, like, the value chain of solar is just dominated by the Chinese manufacturers, and they are innovating. And for better or worse, they made solar and wind affordable and competitive. So you can argue about how they got there and whether or not it was efficient or fair. I think that's definitely debatable.
Yeah.
But there's some of those companies are going to be are really doing well. And even if like, and can we squeeze in batteries? Not necessarily EV, but like, Cattle
Yes.
is killing it. Cattle is a great company. They're super smart. They are building plants offshore, right? They are taking a page from the Japanese playbook, right? Where you look, I understand you don't want me dumping my stuff. What if I bring my manufacturing and my jobs and, by the way, my technology to you? And they make a good product, right? Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yes, they have government subsidies, but guess what an industrial park in the US is? There's also tax breaks, right? I mean, every city in the US gives tax breaks and makes incentives. Granted, it's a question of scale and how much, and yeah, I'm fully aware, but nonetheless, so I would definitely, I'm excited about the battery space in particular. I think there's good work. And then I'm surprised, and like everybody else, that I mean, everyone kind of joked about this, that the U.S. sanctions on semiconductors would spur a boom in innovation in China. Uh, and that was actually the VCs saw that right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
As soon as the sanctions went up, the VCs were like, we got to find the next, AMD or Nvidia in China, and because the U.S. created a new market,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's what's happened now. The new Huawei phone that came out. I'm sure you've seen the reports. Like, are they making the chips at scale or not? Is it commercially viable? Are they making, sure, I don't know, but they're doing it now, and eventually they'll make it profitable. They'll make it, like, the more you do it, the better you get at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So uh, I think the chip sector, and again, like, it kind of makes sense for China to have done this anyway, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of bonkers that you know they were completely reliant on paying patents to Qualcomm and Intel, and right? It's kind of like, when you think about it, it's like, I mean, yes, globalization, but like, it's also kind of like complete reliance, right? It's not like, oh, I have like five suppliers, two are from the States. It's like all my supply completely hinges on this one, right? And vice versa for us. So sometimes decoupling might be rational,
Mm-hmm.
right? A certain amount of like domestic manufacturing ain't bad for an economy. I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not an anti-globalist by any means, but I think sometimes some of what we're seeing, I think, is just maybe a return to a more healthy balance, perhaps, right? Like
Yeah.
WTO. Yeah. Anyway, sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm ranting. I'm ranting.
No, it's
But
okay. I mean, the pendulum has to swing back. I mean, how many decades of low cost lease regulation did manufacturing chase around the world, mostly ending up in China? And you knew that it just couldn't continue that way forever. And and then it's funny because the public is the last to catch up, and then they don't like the rising cost of living, and they don't like the rising cost of their technology and toys and groceries, and it's like, well, you can't have it both ways. But here we are.
right.
I actually want to I want to throw you a bone, give the audience a little disclaimer. We have to be very thankful that Shai is actually doing the show right now, because he is actually really under the weather. You could probably hear it in his voice. He has a couple of germ factories at home, like I do, who have now started going back to school and have been bringing all kinds of fun things back home for us withering adults to deal with. And so you've probably heard that from him, but nevertheless, we got to give him a pass because we're just happy to have him on the show. So, kudos to you for still coming on and bringing so much energy when you're not feeling so well. Now I did take EV and AI off the table because I want to use them later.
Okay.
And so I wanted to keep it going on that. So yeah, if just give us a quick, 2 minute, 1 minute kind of your thoughts on the outlook for the EV sector in China.
Sure. We're gonna have to cut this part because I got to honk.
Nope, no problem.
Sorry, right into the microphone.
No, don't be. I have a fun little button I can hit that puts a marker on the show right where I need it to be.
Okay, great. Hold on.
Yeah. So then I can call
Okay.
right back to it. So it's all good.
All right.
You
So
can launch in.
EVs and AI. Let me talk about EVs first, because one of the things that's really fascinating about being in Bangkok is, unlike Hong Kong, which weirdly doesn't get a lot of Chinese stuff, right? You can't even, it's really complicated to even order from Taobao in Hong Kong because it's like crossing border. But here I get Lazada, which is the Alibaba subsidiary, and it's amazing. It's actually better than Taobao. They have a really good, their English language search is fantastic. Anyway, since I've arrived here, what I've seen is the Chinese EVs everywhere. They're just and so Thailand's interesting because it's always been a car manufacturing hub. That Ford has a big plant here. They make an SUV and a pickup truck. Isuzu, I believe, is here. I think Toyota manufactures. I'm not sure who else, but there's a bunch. There's always had like an auto industry, which is not the first thing you think about when you think of Thailand. And the Chinese are now building here as well. They're building EV plants. They're building battery factories here. And you see them on the street. I see MG, right, the British band that got bought by which Chinese company? I forget. You see a lot of Aura Cat, which looks like the unholy love child of a Volkswagen 70s era Bug and a Tesla. That's made by, I believe it's Great Wall Auto, GW as a Great Wall Auto, Great Wall Motors, Great Wall Motors, GWM.
I owned one. I had, that was my car in China. That's great.
You had an Aura?
No. This was circa 2014.
Oh yeah, no. These things are popular, and they come in like these crazy shades of like chartreuse and like pink. It's not what I would call it's not the car that I would pick, but it's doing really well here. Another, of course, BYDs everywhere, and frankly, they're beautiful looking cars. And they have that really nice hum when they drive slowly, like this little singing thing they do. In our neighborhood, I live in this sort of like exclusive villa gated compound, which has like most of the expats are like NGO types, so like 20-year-old used cars that they've been handing down from generation to generation, and then fairly wealthy Thai. And the Thai are the ones buying the Chinese cars. And so you see at the school parking lot, it's like Porsche, BYD, MGs, who else? Just more and more of the Chinese car companies. They're just everywhere, and the EVs have just boomed. And they're partly on price, but also the products aren't bad. They make a decent product.
Agreed.
And so it's interesting to see like Xpeng doing well. I mean, there's price wars in China, but Xpeng's expanding into Europe, not coming to Thailand yet, which surprised me. I haven't seen Neo yet. I'm trying to think who else I've seen. But yeah, so to me, the EV, overall, China's auto exports have either on track or will surpass Japan. And this is an amazing success story, driven primarily by the private companies. And it's interesting that like one of the within China, the big car makers, the foreigners, all had to do JVs in the beginning, right? And so you had like GM and always, and I've heard people say that like the JVs were so profitable that the Chinese partners didn't have to innovate much. They weren't the state-owned owners, the state-owned partners were just like minting money, and so they didn't feel that fire. Whereas the private guys, the BYDs, the Cherries, etc., just to compete domestically, had to run twice as fast. And yes, of course, if your local governments would pour money at you, and you had subsidies and help and discounts and free land, etc., etc. But still, they're not getting those benefits when they go overseas. Right? When they build manufacturing plants overseas, it's fairly level playing field. And it's going to be interesting to see, particularly in Southeast Asia, where there are the Japanese, the Americans, to see how the Chinese compete in a relatively level playing field. And it seems that so far they're doing pretty well. I think the prices are, they're not. And what's interesting is these cars aren't being marketed as cheap. They're not being marketed as the Yugo of
Right,
today,
right.
right?
Yeah,
It's being marketed as um, mid to upscale, which is
yeah.
interesting, right? And
We're
because
talking like 35,000 US, which
yeah, they
isn't
ain't cheap.
exactly cheap,
Yeah, and
but it's
especially when you
like
consider
half price of
Thailand.
a Tesla.
Yeah, and you see some Teslas around here. I mean, like Hong Kong was like Tesla ground zero. It was ridiculous, but that was because the subsidies uh, effectively made Teslas cheap relative to conventional cars, right? Because especially new cars, you have to pay enormous taxes in Hong Kong, so effectively would double the price of anything. And Tesla had the 2 year buyback program, right? So you could sell it back at like 75%. I forget what the exact percentage was. Plus the local tax discounts also helped it. Um, and I'm curious to see, we left Hong Kong about a year ago, whether the Chinese are making inroads there. But here, certainly, there are also tax benefits to owning EVs. I don't know the exact percentages, um, but um, yeah, it's just fascinating to see how it's booming. And what's interesting about the auto industry is that, it can become a linchpin for a whole nexus of greater growth, right? Just like Detroit, you know, powered so much of America's prosperity for so long, and its decline, its rise and fall and rise again, if you will. I
Yeah.
think what's happening with the auto industry is a real bright spot in an otherwise gloomy Chinese economy. Yes, they are fighting. There's a lot of like price war competition domestically, but I think, and that's also really spurring them to go overseas. But if they pull this off, and they seem to be doing it, it could really generate all sorts of other opportunities. And what's interesting is that the auto supply industry has already been dominated quite a bit by some of the biggest Chinese companies, right? They bought a lot of the big German auto parts makers a while ago, um, and that was a story of maybe 5-10 years ago, where a lot of the auto parts makers were being made, being owned by Chinese, and so that supply chain, that overseas, that supply chain is already Chinese, at least to some extent. Um, and now, and I know that EVs create a different kind of supply chain because you don't need a drivetrain, you don't different kind of motors and whatnot. But so I think
Hmm.
that's an investment opportunity. It's also interesting to see what kind of requirements, like as they build plants overseas, are they going to be spurring uh, little mini ecosystems in the countries where they expand to? Um, but yeah, it's just an incredible phenomenon to see, and a car is a big. I'm wondering if it'll have the same kind of trajectory as the cell phones. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that it's a much higher, it's a much bigger commitment to buy a car than a smartphone.
Yes,
Um,
for sure.
and what's interesting as well is because they're EVs, they also require infrastructure commitments, right? You have to have plug-in stations and whatnot. So that makes them, I think, much stickier. Kind of
Yeah.
like, once you bought this kind of EV, are you going to switch to another? I mean, we have one neighbor here who has a BMW EV, a Tesla, and a BYD. I think they got rid of the BMW. I don't see it parked there anymore. That's the one that was discontinued anyway. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I think that to me is. I mean,
Well, let me
BYD
ask
is
you a
just
question about
phenomenal.
that.
Go ahead. Mm.
And BYD is too. I mean, our old famous investor friend who is deeply into that. Actually, I've kind of got my eye on it. I would actually be very, very interested to get a BYD dealership deal out where I am and be one of the first to be able to jump on top of that. I think that would be really cool. But a little bit off script here, I want to ask you, do you hear any whispers? Because I hear it all the time over here now, and it's starting to filter into the news where people are actually, they're very concerned about the power grid and the draw on power and the expense of electricity, and how as more and more people move to electric vehicles, what that's going to do to the price of electricity, and what that price of electricity is going to do to all the other things that are powered by electricity, especially in and throughout the house, and draw on, certain grids, wealthier grids, where they are. I know in the construction industry that they're all putting all, EV compatible charging stations kind of wired into the garages of all new homes that are being built. I hear some kind of whisperings going on of concerns just around power production and power consumption due to the rise of electric vehicles. Do you hear any of that in that area of the world?
No. It could be because as a percentage, it's quite low still penetration.
Small. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because most people are still driving, combustible.
Fueled engines.
Yeah, and the bigger concern here is aircon around global warming.
Mm-hmm.
The and you see that as well in the U.S. What's really screwing everybody's power grids is not people plugging in Teslas, but people ramping up ACs as we have these crazy heat waves. That's the only thing I've seen that people talk about. Because again, it's just I think the penetration of EVs is still relatively small. There are solutions, right? There's about power storage, right? People are talking more about dispersal of batteries. So I haven't, and it's true that like developing countries don't have the most robust infrastructure. Then again, neither does the U.S., as we've unfortunately seen these, both in California
lately too.
Yeah.
Just
but
the billions or trillions overhaul that they're talking about it needing in the U.S. Like it's starting to get a little scary.
So, but I haven't seen. I think more. And I don't know the numbers, but I just do know that we have to worry about blackouts not when people are commuting, but when the heat waves spike.
Interesting. Is there any thought? I mean, again, wasn't the narrative a decade ago trying to get everybody out of cars, off streets, high occupancy vehicle lanes, tolls for fast lanes, to try to get more people carpooling into public transportation? Like these were the big moves, and it was all around kind of reducing vehicles on the road. And I've been in Asia. I know what traffic congestion truly looks like. I don't think most people that don't live over there can truly understand what traffic congestion can really be like. You should probably be thankful for your, 45 commute that becomes a 55 commute. That's nothing. So I just from an infrastructure perspective, it starts booming, more and more people getting on the roads. Is the landscape from a kind of a structural point of view, infrastructure point of view, ready to take this on? We have ungodly sized parking lots here and parking garages and well, a garage in your home. I just kind of think that if that grows too fast, it would be almost impossible to catch up in the other infrastructure needs ways.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I don't live in Jakarta. I can no longer go vacation in Bali because the traffic there is just insane.
I got married in Bali.
Yeah, your guest would have been stuck in traffic. It's just overwhelmed, right? The roads are still tiny, but now everybody has a car, and a lot of it's domestic tourism. That's really, it's not that there are that many more foreigners renting cars; it's the domestic tourism. And here in Bangkok, they're doing okay, right? They have the SkyTrain, which was a huge help. I live 16 kilometers from the U.S. Embassy, which is like a proxy for downtown. It's taken it can take me 25 minutes on a Sunday or 2 hours on a weekday, and that ain't bad compared to Malaysia, Jakarta, all these other cities. I think on the other hand, uh, they are we're just outside I can almost see it from here. They're building a new extension to the monorail. So all these cities are building, a lot of cities are building public transportation, mostly light rail. Not because subways are very expensive, not necessarily give you a
Yeah.
return. So light rail.
And maybe I'm
I
just naively doing an addition that is actually not there. It's just a swapping out. It's more of a
uh,
trade in.
so Thailand is weird because there has been a fairly um, sizable, like they have a car culture here, right? They got like gearheads, and like there's this rest up near our house where every Friday night, like everybody's there with their like souped up vehicles, right? It's like a total thing, right? They're really into their cars, and um, you don't have to be rich to own a car because there's a very vibrant used car market, and I think I don't know the numbers are, but just from a sense of it, it seems that like car ownership is quite high. So just looking around the houses where I
Mm-hmm.
live, everybody has a car.
Hmm.
Certainly, everybody has a motor as a scooter, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? Everybody's got scooters. What's interesting is that the scooters, I'm beginning to see some electric scooters. Now, by scooter, I mean like Vespa,
Yep.
I don't know,
Yep.
not the
Not the
Silicon
pedal one
Valley.
or the push ones. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so you're beginning to
Or
see some of
the
those
right,
being
right,
electric.
right, 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 right. Yeah. No, these are the ride on.
Yeah,
Typically need insurance, license plate type things.
yeah. So some of those are going electric. I think places like Jakarta are I mean, it's gotten so bad they're relocating the capital, right? They just said do over, and we'll set up a new capital. Kuala Lumpur is becoming, unmanageable. Uh, Saigon also, people complain about it, but and in Bangkok, like it was really horrific. The SkyTrain has changed a lot. It's weird though. So they've got this really nice light rail, the SkyTrain. Buses are horrific looking, unair conditioned, kind of like look like
Mm-hmm.
1970s era. I don't know enough to understand why the buses are so dismal looking, whereas the rail looks pretty nice. And of course, COVID's kind of screwed up everybody's plans, right? Like everybody's infrastructure projects got delayed and caught up, and it's finally looking like the projects around here and they have a very ambitious plan for Bangkok. It seems to be finally getting some steam. They
Yeah.
had some political uncertainty for a while, and now that they've finally got the government in place, it seems that a lot of these projects will get back on track. Um, but you're right. Like, how sustainable is everybody owning a car? Um, Not very. And I don't know the
Because the
percentage of
rate
people.
of how that can grow is going to absolutely, like you said, on infrastructure development. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just going to, it could potentially just far outpace, as we saw in China, where it was just a mobile smartphone versus the growth of the computer. I mean, they just left that behind.
yeah,
And
yeah.
nobody even bothered. It didn't need to. I want to skip over maybe AI because we have covered that a little bit on the show before. But I
Okay.
want to get, because of where you're based, I do want to get a little bit more into talking about the e-commerce platforms in Southeast Asia. And I'd like to know your assessment of that current competitive landscape and who maybe some of the hot upstarts are and how Alibaba is kind of handling all of this all of these challengers.
So I here in Thailand, um, you have it's dominated by Lazada and Shopee. Shopee being part of Singapore-based Sea, which is also a gaming company, and Lazada, the unit of Alibaba. Um, and the local upstarts are not. There's a lot of competition on food delivery, but e-commerce is quite locked up by Lazada and Shopee. And
Mm-hmm.
Anecdotally, I know Shopee had a rough time. Uh, was it last year, and they seem to be turning the corner. I just don't see their scooters much in our neighborhood. Now that could just be, again, like anecdotal, right? I do know that Shopee has tie-ins with big brands here. You can even like use them to pay tolls and whatnot. But Lazada is by far the best. But to give you an example of how fragmented, the things that are really fragmented here are payments and food delivery. And I'm just going to open up, Thailand's a whack of, one of the weirdest things about Thailand is that they use this app called Line, which I don't know if you're familiar. Line is founded in Korea, but now owned by Japanese, as I recall. And they're kind of like, it's only popular in Japan, I think Korea to some extent, and here.
Yeah, Line was Japan, Kakao was Korea, and then WeChat was China.
Right. And so I have like 15 different platforms, including stone carvings and smoke signals. But I'm just pulling up somebody that I order from, not Vapor, trying to find somebody. No,
you're going to lead in on the payments.
This, by the way, is all. I'm not buying from them, but this is the Cannabis Delivery app.
Oh wow! And it's just a full app.
I mean, it's an official account within Line.
Oh wow!
And
let's there's definitely going to be a part 2 here later. I skipped over AI. There's other things we got.
Here we go. There's your choice of what bud you want.
Wow! Look at that. Well, good on them.
And then let's see how
keep
how do
everybody chill.
Yeah, let's see. How do I order? It goes to something called Fun Crown. Yeah, no, I haven't. It's just research. I'm just doing it for research. Oh, here we go. Tony's Kitchen. Tony's Kitchen is this like little corner, a fried noodle joint. But the owner is pretty savvy. He's managed to turn his little corner shop into he does catering to the local hospital and whatnot. So he's grown his business pretty well. But if you want to order from him, here are the 6 options you have for getting your food delivered.
From like the delivery company, you mean? So
this is a local.
Wow.
So Tony's is just a local restaurant, right? It's only open like 6 a.m. to 5, closed on Saturdays. And if I want to order from them, I get a choice from Line Man, Grab Food, which you might know as Grab, right?
Yeah.
Robin Hood, which I don't even know. True, which is the local. It's the telecoms company. It's the Air Asia, which is the airline, which is now also doing a super app to selling food, and then Shopee Food. So if you have a choice of 6 companies, my guess is ain't nobody making a buck.
No.
Right? No one's going to be charging a ton. And what's interesting as well is locally, most people are old school. They say, actually, I prefer if you just called me directly because I don't want to pay a cut to the delivery companies.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of just old school calling somebody up. And then what's interesting though is what's great is that the local banks here though have been very good about adapting digital payments. Apparently, K-Bank, which I cannot pronounce their full name, was one of the earliest to adopt sort of digitization back in the day. What is their full name? They're my bank. And so here, let's say I want to, I just scan, like somebody can show me the receipt. I just scan the receipt and it instantly goes to their account. And I can QR to pay, QR to receive. I can just show somebody my QR code and they can pay me right away. It goes right into my account, no fees.
Yeah. It's very WeChat-esque.
Yes, but apparently these guys have been doing it before. But yeah, I think it is.
I remember getting up. There was a pay or receive, and it was just that you could toggle back between the two. And one was a QR code that somebody could scan to send you money, and then there was a barcode that you could pull up that the storefront cashier could just scan. They'd scan all your items and then go right right in time, right to your phone, scan that barcode, and then it would ask you if you want to pay, and it would do like a facial recognition or something like that, and then you just press yes, and then the money be gone. They saw it on their till that you're paid, and they're like, "Yep, you're gone out of here."
Yeah, yeah. So, but this is the banks doing it directly. But it also, if you go to a 7-Eleven, it's like, which of 17 payment apps do you want to use?
Yeah. And was there not loyalty programs that is it always going to make you choose the exact same one? Or like with all these delivery options, aren't you always going to go with the one that you're building loyalty and points and potentially, rewards with?
Yeah, but so they're always going to be competing. Every time company A does a promotion, company B only has to do a little bit more to undercut it.
Yeah,
Right?
but
You
if
end
you
up
have
with a subsidy.
10,000 points with one, you're going to want to add to that total to unlock
But how are you going to
bigger.
get to that point? How are you going to get there? Right? Yes, I'm sure you can get to that, but if it's constantly this market has always been fragmented.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I
And
mean,
that's a great example of how it is.
I think the True Mobile has as one of the big cellular phone providers, you accrue points on their platform just from using the phone and from topping up data or whatnot. So maybe they can kind of steer you to using those points. Like if you have like a platform, cross-platform synergies, Shopee can have a cross-platform synergy. Grab Food, I guess, also to a certain extent. I forgot. Food Panda's here too. So there's actually 7.
Oh, well,
There you go.
of
Food
course.
Panda.
Is there like anti-monopoly laws that are just so super strict? Like how have not 2 or 3 of them gotten together? They just not playing nice.
I don't know. Oh, there has been some mergers. Wong Nai, which was another local company, a food delivery app, got acquired by Line. So there's been a bit of consolidation. I'm actually surprised Lazada isn't playing in this field as well because they already have the whole network of the delivery infrastructure. I don't know, to be honest. I don't. I'm
Maybe they're
not.
too busy spinning up Lazada Basics in their
Well,
own line of.
and some of these are new, right? Like the Air Asia food is a new entry into the market.
Mm.
It could be also that because delivery. I think the cost of the delivery is relatively cheap, right? Hiring a guy or a woman to get on a moped and deliver food might be that cost of entry might be low. I just don't understand the unit economics of it to
No,
be
but it's
honest.
so counter to the grip Meituan has in China.
Right.
And that was, well, from what I've heard, without firsthand experience working at Meituan or whatever. It's just they were willing to do the dirty boots on the ground work of landing every single mom and pop that other companies just either couldn't afford or weren't willing to do. And typical shop owners, they aren't that interested to switch once they're with somebody. They're kind of good. They're like, no, we don't need another one, or I don't want to bother trying to figure it out or onboard or what have you. For whatever reason, it just seems like Meituan is going to. They're one of the most stabilized top platforms in their sector, just due to the fact that it's going to be really really hard to unseat them for multiple very difficult barriers that are in place.
Yeah, I don't. It could be that the subsidy wars. There's no one with the billions of dollars to do that kind of subsidy war. All of these companies have done the nitty gritty of block by block
Yeah.
customer acquisition. I think it's also very easy now because the payments infrastructure is already in place. It's very easy. Like these, what's different about China versus here is the banks are already digital, right? They also still do a lot of you can do cash on delivery still for Lazada and whatnot, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that's an option, but it seems to be happening less and less.
Yeah.
But because the payments infrastructure is already in place, I think for a restaurant owner it doesn't matter because it's not that my money. I mean, Shopee and everybody wants you to put money into their platform. Like there's True Money, there's Grab Wallet. Everyone's trying to convince you to park cash in their platform, but I haven't seen, and like you'll get points, but it's not, doesn't seem to be sticky enough where people will actually put a lot of money. I don't know the dynamics of it, but it's simple enough because the banking payment is so easy. Whoever I Whichever platform I discover a restaurant in isn't the platform that's handling the payment necessarily. They're just going to be effectively like it's like Amazon doesn't own the MasterCard process, right? You go to Amazon, but you use PayPal.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have the same stickiness in China. Meituan has a more sticky relationship with you because of the WeChat platform where the payments are kind of steered through that as opposed to an independent third party such as a PayPal in the US. And I think maybe that's what's happening where there's less of a reason for me to only use one place. It's like, oh, I found these guys are offering a discount on my favorite restaurant. Great, I'll use them today. Because the payment's not going through them. Right? They're a broker, but my experience of them is still, so maybe from the merchant's perspective, they have a preference for maybe they get like a different take rate on different platforms, but from the consumer's perspective, it's just like, where can I find the restaurant? The payment will happen wherever. If I get maybe a discount on somebody, but there's no reason for me to be loyal to one over the other.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and that leads me to have a bunch more questions. For instance, something that I use that I really like is something from Shopify called Shop, which is tied into my e-commerce platforms and does all my shipment tracking for me all in one place. Even if I order off AliExpress, everything can kind of go in there. I can actually pay with Shop. That I get a little bit of rewards with, or whether it's off Wish or what have you. I get it. That's a very interesting app on its own, which is really almost just, as we have so many shipments coming from so many different platforms. Now I've got just this one. I can actually open it and see all shipments and delivery, where they are, where they're going. They've got a little map that shows where it's at customs or other things like that, which I really, really like as well. Even things getting into like finances or stuff like Credit Karma, which is what I use, kind of track. It's a bit of an anti-fraud. I get notified when I can track my credit score, all these kinds of things as well. And there's a lot of things that we need to talk about, and I think this is going to require a second episode. And I'm going to leave it to my compatriot Liam to try to set something up so that we can dive into things like AI, which we really didn't get into. Talk about more about some of the technology trends that are happening in Southeast Asia, even around social, and just maybe some of the trends of Chinese investment into Southeast Asia and where that's coming from. There's just a lot more to talk about, but
yeah, we didn't even touch on TikTok. We didn't. And we talked about e-commerce. We didn't even talk about TikTok, which is like right.
And that
and Facebook is still huge out here.
Yeah,
e-commerce.
We have to dive into this. Yeah, okay. So we're just teasing all the audience now for like coming and joining us for part 2, but we're gonna put a pin in this one as far as part 1 is kind of concerned, because we don't want to bump too much past an hour. We know that you probably stayed with us for quite some time, and that is a lengthy first episode as it is. So, for now, Shai, thank you very much. Why don't you tell people maybe where they can find some of your content, some of your writing, get in touch. Maybe they want to have you join their show as well, like you have ours. How can people find you?
Sure. As I said, I'm on Smoke Signals, Stone Carvings, and Telepathy. My email is shai, shai.oster, O-S-T-E-R, @gmail.com, shai, shai.oster, @gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter. This is dating myself. I'm at Beijing Scribe, because I didn't know that I would ever live anyplace else. How could that be? So yeah, at Beijing Scribe on Twitter. The information content and the Wall Street Journal stuff, that's mostly behind paywalls, but you can Google me and you'll find plenty of stuff, I'm sure, going back to my days as a stringer back in the late 90s.
Nice.
And if you're looking for someone, I'm happy to do, I'm open for business. So if people need some help with strategic comms or other advisory, around the idea around China and Southeast Asia, I'm more than happy to discuss.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, thank you very, very much. And I think anybody who's listening to this show is going to be pretty eager to get in touch with you and consume more. So, but we have already consumed an hour of everybody's time, including yours, Shai. Thank you very, very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate you joining us today.
This is my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Okay, as usual, for those of you listening to us audio only on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, you name it, don't forget that you can go and watch us discuss all this kind of stuff and maybe see some of those screenshots as Shai was holding his phone up to the camera over on the WPIC YouTube channel. But for me and everybody at the Negotiation and for Shai, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.